Hi there, this is Helen Tarrant again from another here with our whole team. Wow, it's massive.
Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. You're here with Helen Tarrant, and you might be wondering, with the interest rate going up, what's the onflowing effect of that to commercial property? A lot of people are asking that question of, should I sit out for 6 months? Should I wait another 12 months to see how things work? What's going to happen in the commercial property space? Am I going to get better returns? Should I go back to the vendor and now say the interest rate's gone up, so you should give me more yield and more returns? Well, number one, your vendor is not responsible for the RBA putting up the interest rate, so therefore they're not going to renegotiate the rate for you. Number two is that we're still in a seller's market in the commercial space, and with the interest rate going up, what's going to happen is going to push more residential purchases into the commercial space, which means that your yield, which now at the moment might be sitting between 5 to 5.5% in metro, like in an area in Brisbane or in somewhere in Perth or fringe Melbourne and Sydney, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse, which means that you could potentially see a 5.5% property going towards 5 to 4.75 to even 4.5 within a 12 to 24 month period. And because of that, you need to get in now to buy commercial property, and that's really important, right? So if you want to book in for a calendar and a strategy call, link is below, book in with one of us. But that aside, how does the onflowing effect works for commercial property? Well, number one, what happens when interest rate goes up is that it creates stress for the average mortgage holder in the residential space. So if you're a residential investor in your own personal home, it goes up, for every 500,000 that you have borrowed, it's probably going to work out at the moment an extra $25 a week, something like that, right? Could be more, could be less, it could be wrong. This is just rough figures, right? So by the time we get to a 1% increase from what it currently is to the future, it could be somewhere around $50 a week to $75 a week, right? So that translates to a couple of $100 a month. So somewhere between $200 to $300 a month when we're sitting, 1% point above. So what does that mean for the average mortgage holder who is on a fixed salary? So your average fixed salary is probably somewhere between 80 to 100 grand a year, potentially more, but after tax, they're not bringing home a huge amount, and they've got, kids, they've got mortgage, they probably have some kind of other investments they have to support, their car payments, extracurricular activities, holidays they're trying to book, and as well as just your normal living expenses. So as a result of that, what will happen is that they'll start to cut back on some of these extracurricular activities. They'll start cutting back on eating out. They'll start cutting back on potentially the type of food they're going to shop in supermarkets and buy, and also the things that they're going to get for their kids. So they might buy one less handbag. They might go shopping in retail less. They might be looking for a cheaper alternatives. So potentially, if they love to go to their favorite restaurant Friday night and some other night during the week and get a takeout, they potentially might go, okay, we're going to go out for dinner, or we're going to scrap going out for dinner now. We're just going to get takeout and also another, takeout twice a week instead of going out for dinner, right? Or alternatively, they might have 3 extracurricular activities for their kids. They might drop it down to 2, so they have 1, and they might potentially save themselves. They literally will save themselves that $40 by cutting out 1 curricular activity, right? Take it from me, that's 1 art class for my son, right? So they literally, if they cut that out, then they've found that money to be able to pay the mortgage, and they don't have to change everything else. So they just keep the kid at home. They can watch some TV. They might do some homeschooling, and they might take them and put them into after school care, and that might solve the problem, right? So what will onflow to your tenants as a commercial landlord is that your tenants are potentially not able to pay a higher level of rent because they're not getting the sales. So all of a sudden, if they're seeing sales diminish, and so someone could be getting 1 less cup of coffee a week, right? So that adds up $5 for a cup of coffee over a month. That's somewhere between $20 to $25, depending on how many weeks are in a month, right? So that can go towards a mortgage repayment, right? They could take pack lunches 1 or 2 days a week, and again, that goes towards mortgage repayment. There's numerous ways people can cut back and that they can help them make their mortgage repayments. But the on-flowing effect for you as a landlord for a commercial property is that you're not going to be able to put out the same rent. The flip side of that, unfortunately, is that the value of the property continues to go up. So even if the rent stays stagnant, the value continues to go up, the yield continues to compress because there's more buyers in the market and there is less supply and more demand. So you don't get that equality or equilibrium. So you're still going to end up paying that same price or higher, but the rent hasn't gone up. And you might see that the CPI is 6% in Brisbane. You might see CPI is about 7.5 or more in Perth, and it's over 4 in Sydney and Melbourne. But in reality, being able to pass that on to your tenant consistently over a period of time is going to be hard. This time, what does that mean to your tenant, right? A 7% or a 6% of a CPI increase on an average rental outside of, say, $60,000 a year is somewhere around an extra $300 a month in rent, right? And that is a huge amount of money for the average tenant, because $300 a week, that's directly out of their profits, right? So they're earning less profits. If they're bringing home less profits, and they won't be able to afford their mortgage, if they're not having enough people coming through the door, they're not making enough sales. So it's just continuously on-flowing effect. So the on-flowing effect is that you might now be able to put up rent, but not at 6%. You might be able to put up rent at 3%, which is more realistic, right? Your tenant can afford $150 a month more than $300. Right? So it's about you coming to an equitable position, right? And we've just come out of 2 years of downward pressure on rent. And unfortunately, with the interest rate going up, that downward pressure on rent is going to continue. So that is the bad news. It is going to continue. And because tenants are going to be very, very cautious that they're going to make sure they have enough sales before they sign longer leases. So you're going to find that there's even more scarcity of longer leases in the market. Most tenants will sign a 1 to 2 year lease. You're going to find that 3-year lease becomes what people now call it long leases, where in the past it was, a standard lease. And 5-year lease is becoming, a really long lease, a phenomenally long lease, very secure asset. And that's where people are going to be paying a premium for. So that's what the on-flowing effect of interest rate rises to commercial rent's going to be. Now, that's not going to affect the value, because the value will go up because more demand, right? So as an investor, what does that mean to you? And how is that going to translate to you going into investment? Should you be sitting out for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? Should you be looking at alternatives? Well, the biggest thing to go forward to remember is if you don't do it now, you have to accept a lower return in the future. So you better do it now. You better buy a commercial property now, this year. Right? Because next year is going to be worse. Is it going to bounce back? It probably will bounce back, but it will not bounce back as hard as people think, because there's all that demand is coming into the market more and more into the commercial space. The other thing to think about is that you might find that the best way to actually get ahead in the commercial space is to find and be able to be in a position where you can pick up properties that have lower rents, that is going to be sold, that potentially looks like a lower yield, right? A lower rent sold on a 5% yield where the market might be 6%. And in the future, you can actually have the ability to change that property. So the property versatility becomes more important. So even if you have a tenant that's underperforming inside, that actually will help you secure that property at a good value rather than competing with everyone else looking for the 5-year lease tenant. Right? Securing a property with good value is more important going forward than the lease terms. Yes, the tenant is important in commercial property. Yes, 3 years, 5 years, 7, 10 years is important, and you will get that kind of tenant. But you are now going to be faced with paying even more of a premium than you did in the past. So perhaps to think counterintuitively is to think that you could find a property that is not loved, or find a property that has the tenant paying really low rent, and then being able to maybe put the tenant into one part of the property and then rent out the other part. or changing the nature of the property. So if the property is a straight, freestanding office space, maybe you can add disability access to it. Maybe if you've got a property that has that's a warehouse, could you could put some of your shipping containers at the back to get some more extra rent, right? So you would be better off to find those extra rents than to pay for it, right? So don't compete with the rest of the crowd, because that's not going to do you any better. Go your own pathway, which is what Unicorn Commercial is really great at, is building out your unique pathway and making sure that you achieve that result. So if you can firstly find it mindset wise that you can deal with properties that are less perfect, then you are going to come a long way in finding and getting ahead of the market. So finding a property that is less perfect, getting a property that is potentially not in the best area, so doesn't have to be prime location, you could be a few streets back, as long as you can get, it's versatile, right? Make sure that you really get value for the property, that it can be re-tenanted easily. You can put new tenants in or change the layout of that property. So a dual tenancy is really great, or a property that you can dual tenant or split up into two as well. So those things are a good option. Now, also, the one other thing to think about in terms of the rents is potentially, if you wanted to keep your rents high, is to give your tenant incentives, to build in the incentives. Yes, if you said, look, I want you to pay $60,000 in rent, I'm going to give you an extra, the rent increase is 6% because of, Brisbane market, or 7% because you're in Perth. Your tenant might go, I can't really afford that. One of the options is to actually add in the rental incentive, is to say, hey, maybe I'll give you a month off rent, month rent free, but then the rest you pay the higher amount. What that will do is continue to keep the value of your property up and your rent base level up, but that 1 month sort of compensates for it. And that might help with your tenant negotiations, but also help you to keep the value of your property up in this current market as well. Again, we're always on the search for value, alternative strategies, and how to combat what's currently happening. One last point. Going up, if you can, rather than going down, is easier to find the returns. So if you can buy 1.5 rather than 1, or if you're 1.5 and rather than split it up into two 600s, then buy the 1.5, right? If you do desperately need to grow and you need to have only this amount of deposit and you really struggle to find another, we'll split it up and help you with that. But if you can go up a bracket, up a tier, you are going to do better. You are going to do better, you're going to find better stock, and you're going to have hugely better returns, okay? So make sure you think about all those things. The main thing is, if you are already a commercial landlord, don't push your tenant too hard. The thing is, the tenant's already under a lot of stress. It has been a renter's market for a while, and we've had a little bit of a breather now. Some of the rents have corrected, but unfortunately going forward, you're going to see that downward pressure on rent again going forward, probably in the next 18 or 24 months again, which is not good news, but it means that you're still going to get cash flow in your pocket. That the good thing is, maintain that relationship with your tenant. Make sure that you know what your baseline is, what you can accept. And also, when you negotiate with the tenant, you've got to make sure it's a win-win situation, because you don't want them to go bust, right? If you go bust, the next lot of tenants coming in is going to negotiate even harder, and that's what you don't want. So keep your tenants, find a happy medium where both of you are a little bit unhappy, but both of you are a little bit happy, and you can still reap cash flow from commercial property. So again, if you need us to help you out, check us out, helentarrant.com or unicorn.com.au. Links below. If you need to book in for a strategy session, again, put the link, click the link, and let us help you build out your commercial property portfolio with you.